Welcome to another exciting episode of Humanity 8.0, a podcast where we talk about our post-truth present and our transhuman future, with the aim of sketching out the outlines of what awaits us in the years and the decades ahead of us. This podcast is brought to you by Rokos. Companies with limited IT budgets and personnel can now get the same cybersecurity protection as big enterprises. Rokos' Secure Access Service Edge, SASE solution, with zero trust, provides enterprise-grade comprehensive cybersecurity so that you can focus on your business. For more, please visit www.rokos.com. That's ROQOS.com. And now, here's your host, Dr. Ahmed Bouzid, founder and CEO of Witlingo.
Eileen, Reevey, welcome to Humanity 8.0.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you for making the time. I appreciate it very much. So as I was telling you very briefly before we started, that up to this point, we've been focusing on disruptions that are focused mainly on technology. For example, transhumanism, people who want to enhance their body or increase longevity of your regular human being from, 80 to 150 or something like that, which obviously would have extreme consequences on how we live, resources. There are many consequences. So I've had conversations with those kinds of folks. Also, I had one interview with someone who is into space colonization, like colonizing the moon. Thinking about a day when, and apparently it's not that far away, when going to the moon is just like going to, a faraway place like Australia or China from the United States, right? So you hop on a shuttle, whatever it may be, it's safe, it's affordable, and everybody can do it. And so what does that mean? I'm sure that means something very consequential. And then what does it mean in terms of nations? Like, are they going to start claiming parts of the moon and so forth, right? And then we're going to talk about generative AI, like ChatGPT. This AI is very, human-like in the sense that it produces stuff that is really high quality, right? What's the consequences of that on society? But I'm starting to think about other dimensions, like the economic, like the gig economy, the passion economy, and the political, and hence our conversation today, which is about you guys, your organization, wishing to introduce a radical, I would say, in its consequences, at least a radical innovation in our political system in the United States. So that's the introduction. So my first question to you is, you are the director of the National Popular Vote, right?
I'm the Grassroots director.
The Grassroots director. Question one, what is the National Popular Vote, and who is funding it, and what is its mission?
Yeah. So we are a nonprofit organization, specifically a C4, which means we focus on advocacy. Mm-hmm. And our mission is to pass the National Popular Vote bill. So we only work on one thing, and it is this one piece of legislation. So what that bill is something that will guarantee that whoever wins the most popular votes in all 50 states and DC will win the Electoral College and win the popular vote. So this is a way that we make it so that we have a national popular vote for our presidential elections. We make every vote equal. We make it so candidates have to campaign everywhere. And I think it's a crucial part of fixing what's broken within our electoral system. Definitely we'll expand further on how that works as we talk. And as far as funding, we are a nonprofit organization, so we take donations from individuals, from foundations. A lot of the initial funding did come from our founder who came up with this idea. Then that is Dr. John Koza, and he's still the chairman of our board, who is an inventor, and so put some of his personal money behind this to get it going.
Wonderful. Okay. And what do you think is broken with the current system, and in what way is that state of being broken? In what way does that harm us as citizens in this democracy?
Yeah. Well, 5 of our 46 presidents have come into office without winning the most popular votes. I do not think that that is something that is good for America, especially in this day and age. It leads, first of all, to a lack of understanding and trust in the electoral system. George Bush had a crisis of legitimacy in 2000 after winning the election despite losing the popular vote by around 500,000 votes. That was amplified when Donald Trump won the Electoral College, but lost the popular vote by 2.8 million. So I think that is something that creates unsteadiness in our society and makes it so that people don't trust our political system. And that's just the surface of the problems that this electoral system creates, because there are so many ways that people don't think about that it impacts your daily life. Starting with the ones within the election. Because of this, candidates are only campaigning in a handful of states from election to election. I live in California. They are not campaigning to people in California because California and 48 other states have chosen to use a statewide winner-take-all law when they award their electors. So what this means is whoever gets the most votes within a state gets all of that state's electoral votes. Mm-hmm. So California, we know whoever the Democratic candidate is in 2024, they are going to win California. There is no point in them spending any resources here to try and get those votes, or in the Republican trying to get those votes because they're so far behind. And specifically, this is the general election, so it does not change anything with the primaries. So looking ahead to the 2024 election, I could pretty safely tell you how 40 states are going to vote in the presidential election. And so the entire campaign is going to come down to 10 or less by the time we get to that point. And so with a national popular vote, that will not be the case. Candidates will be incentivized to go to all 50 states. And whether you're in Juneau, Alaska or downtown Manhattan, your vote is going to have equal weight, which both of those places are currently irrelevant in our electoral system. Mm-hmm. And as far as policy implications, 5 of our 9 Supreme Court justices were appointed by popular vote losers. So I think regardless of what you think of any individual opinions that have come out, polling does show that Americans feel that the Supreme Court is out of step with the country as a whole and what Americans want. I think there's a pretty clear, direct line from that and the fact that a majority of them were appointed by a candidate that the most Americans did not want when they voted.
Makes sense. Yeah.
And then it gets into other things, specifically around discretionary federal grants. A study found that they are the battleground states, the ones that are most relevant in the presidential election, get more discretionary grants. They get more federal disaster declarations from Congress. In 2020, when states were putting in their request to the federal government from the Federal Reserve for COVID supplies and help for, masks, ventilators, gowns, gloves, Colorado and Florida put their requests in on the same day. Florida got 100% of what they asked for. Colorado got 17%. You cannot deny the fact that there's something going on there, right? There's partisan politics being played, and Florida was critical in the 2020 election. It was critical in 2016. It was one of the ways that Donald Trump won the presidency. And one of his staffers actually was asked about this and said, the president knows what states are important to him in the next election. So we're past the point of presidential candidates trying to hide it. Honestly, it used to be, we're going to pretend or act like we're really trying to win the popular vote, right? Because that's maybe good politics for them overall. But really, they were trying to win the battleground states. Yeah. And starting in 2016, Donald Trump was the first candidate to really say, I don't care about winning the popular vote. I'm going to focus on the battleground states. I think we're going to see that more and more.
Okay. So just for someone like myself who is only scratching the surface in terms of my beginning to understand what your movement is about, and I think definitely is probably an overdue movement, or probably has been going on and only now hopefully it's getting some attention. But tell me the difference between this, if there is any, and say how most presidents in other democracies are elected. So for example, I don't know, in France, I know it's popular vote, right? It's pure popular vote. How is your proposal? Because I think the Electoral College is still there, right? How is your proposal or this new system different from, say, pure out, just total numbers, this column versus column, the winner is the one who gets more?
So really, there's two differences. One is just the mechanics of how we get there. For our US senators, our governors, almost every other race in this country, it's whoever gets the most votes wins. It's only those intermediary steps of going through the Electoral College process with electors voting that really makes it different. The second thing, though, is that our organization, we are doing this through a state-by-state movement to reform the Electoral College, to fix it from within. So we are not advocating for a U.S. constitutional amendment. So the other thing is the fact that, states reserve their right to participate or not. When it's in effect, it's going to be the popular vote counted out from all 50 states in DC or not. But at the end of the day, we'll still have that Electoral College process where some states might not participate and, are still going to vote the way that they vote now.
Okay. Well, let's just do a thought experiment and say all of the states opted in. Now, describe to me whether that makes the Electoral College now irrelevant, or if not, how does it continue to play its role within that system?
Yeah, if we got to the point where all 50 states in DC were a member of the National Popular Vote Compact, the Electoral College process would be pretty ceremonial at that point. That it would be the electors are meeting and going through that process, and then the votes are being counted by Congress. So that would be the main thing. I think the only other thing is that states theoretically could withdraw them from themselves from that in the future, but it's unlikely. So yeah, it's
okay. And so tell me why, because I believe that the initial rationale for, or at least on the surface, for small states getting 2 senators, for example, and all that, and is to ensure that they don't get ignored, right? That they also have a say in, all right? Now, if let's say, why would someone within this new, let's say we are at that state, why would someone go to Wyoming to campaign?
Yeah. Well, first I would say, are they going to Wyoming now? And they are not. So yeah, under our current system, we have 14 states that have 3 or 4 electoral votes, and you cannot have less than 3. It just so happens that 7 of those are consistently Democratic and 7 are consistently Republican. They're smaller, more homogenous states, so they are completely ignored under the current system. And so from 0, you can only go up. And so, Wyoming, it is the smallest state, but it's still, it has 500,000 people. It has a greater population than Al Gore won the national popular vote
so
by in 2000. So
it could make a difference. Yeah. Okay.
And every vote is equal.
Yeah. And how about the sort of the the opposite or the flip side, which is why shouldn't the campaigner, again, because they have a budget and it's limited and limited time and so on, focus only on the big, the populous states and mainly the big cities?
Yeah.
Why wouldn't they motivate? I'm sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, because those places are not always as big as we think. If a candidate were just campaigning in California and New York, you're only talking to 18% of the U.S. population. That is not going to win you an election, even if you get 100% of them to turn out and vote for you. If we look at the population of our 100 largest cities, it is 19.6% of the U.S. population. It is almost equal to the percentage of Americans that live in rural America, as defined by the U.S. Census, which is 20%. So you could no more just talk to rural voters and expect to win than you could talk to those in big cities and expect to win. So realistically, the candidates are going to be talking to both of those groups and in the suburbs, because across the country, that is where 60% of Americans live. That is where people are evenly divided between Republicans and Democrats. So they're going to be forced to campaign all over, because otherwise they're just not going to win.
Yeah. And in the last, let's say the last 4, 5, 6 elections, presidential elections, I know the last time it was, how many millions? Was 4 or 5 millions Biden won, and before that was Hillary Clinton won by 3 million. And so those are numbers that that can be, that are not, that's not huge, right? It's not like 25 million. It's a few million that can, if you go and try to garner as many votes across the country as possible, that might become more rare for you to go everywhere. Right? Am I thinking you do it the right way there? Like
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, Joe Biden won the last presidential election not by the 7 million vote popular vote, but because of a 44,000 vote lead in 3 states. So he was very, very close to actually losing that election.
Yes.
And so with a national popular vote, those 7 million is still, you're right, a relatively small margin in the grand scheme of things, which means that there are going to be millions of more voters that hopefully they'll be talking to, right? You know, a lot of people, if you're in a state that is a safe state, no one's asking for your vote in the presidential election, and you are not necessarily motivated to vote for it when the most visible thing on the ticket is something that your vote, if you feel like, isn't going to matter. So we see voter turnout is 11% higher in the swing states than it is in the rest of the country. So if we pass this, I mean, we're immediately enfranchising the most amount of people that the U.S. has seen since the passing of the Voting Rights Act in the 1960s. People are going to be aware of that. And so I think we're going to see a big rise up in people actually participating. So there will be a lot more votes to be fought over.
Yeah. And so I guess I'm just thinking in real time here, if you have more participation in the presidentials, there'll also be more participation, down the ballot, right? Folks, voting for initiatives and, and the local congressman and so forth, congressperson and so forth, right? So I think that's probably one of your arguments, is greater participation is always a good thing.
Yes, I certainly hope that we'll see greater down ballot participation as well.
Yeah. My next question is: do you think that that by having candidates need to campaign everywhere, right? So they have to grab as many votes as possible, and go to every nook and cranny and so forth. Do you think that campaigns then become very expensive? And you need to really raise a lot of money to be able to set up field offices everywhere, to travel everywhere, to actually deliver on the promise of a national campaign, right? What do you think? Would it make it just very expensive on only folks who have a machine, or some kind of a brand, like, I don't know, Bernie Sanders, who's been around for a long time? What are the consequences of having this on things like that?
Yeah. So one thing to keep in mind is that by the time this comes into play, we're already down to the Democratic and Republican candidate. So whoever has won their primaries is going to be who's moving forward. This does not change the fact that we are a two-party system. So we're still going to have those two big parties. And, of course, our third parties participating as well. So I don't think it'll be of so much as who can get there with their brand. But what I love about this question is because this is something that I was hung up on for a while when I first started learning about this cause, because personally, I'm a supporter of campaign finance reform and getting big money out of politics. Asterisk that's my personal opinion, not national popular votes. But it's actually not the case, because if you think about it, presidential candidates and their super PACs are not turning down a single penny that they can get right now, right? The campaigns are becoming more and more expensive. It crossed over $1 billion in the 2020 election. That is still going to happen, fortunately or unfortunately, however you look at it. And so it's just going to change where the money is spent. So instead of flooding markets with, I'm going to drop $50 million in Pennsylvania, let's spend that money in Pennsylvania, New York, Delaware, and Maryland. Yeah.
So you're saying the fact that it's going to have to, that the campaigns will need to be but have offices everywhere, buying media everywhere, and so forth, doesn't necessarily mean that there'll be an increase, but only a distribution of the money that's already, being garnered right now. Okay, no, I can buy that. I can definitely buy that. It makes sense. Do you, beyond that, do you think that the culture, currently the political culture, I mean, what's the rate of participation today in presidentials? Like 60+%, something along those lines, or maybe less, maybe more?
It varies greatly from state to state. Some states are over 70, but I think the average is around 62%.
60%. And then in states where that are completely taken for granted, I'm assuming that the opposition, let's say California Republicans, is their participation really low, a lot lower than the average, or are they still getting out, for local elections?
Yes, I'd say the minority party often has a harder time turning out voters, and you see lower participation rates.
Yeah. So today you have how many states? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. Do you have 12 states?
We have 15 states and DC.
Okay, well, you need to update your map because it has only every state counts. Everyone counts, right?
Yeah.
So you have 15 states. So tell me, what does it mean that these states are now opting in? What does that mean?
So they have passed a law in their state legislature that says we want our electors to go to the winner of the national popular vote. And this bill only gets triggered into effect in that state when collectively we have at least 270 electoral votes signed on, because that's a majority of the Electoral College. That is the number you need to win an election. So when we have 270 electoral votes committed to the national popular vote winner, that guarantees that whoever wins the popular vote wins the Electoral College. And so this is an interstate compact, which, a lot of people haven't heard about that in their day-to-day life, but is actually common. This is how states get into agreements with each other, is they pass identical laws. This is how they share driver's license information between states. This is how they share sex offender registry lists. So it is, how they manage waterways. So it is something that is relatively common practice within states. And so that is how our bill works, is getting states to agree to this overall mechanism together.
Okay. So I don't think I followed it completely. Let's do a thought experiment. If this, I guess, was this in effect in 2020?
No.
It was not. Okay. So how would it have, if it were in effect, how would it have affected that election?
Yeah. If nothing else changed and vote totals were the same, then Joe Biden would have won. We wouldn't have been counting votes for 3 days and wondering and hanging on the edge of our seats who was going to win the election, because it was very clear on election night he was millions of popular votes ahead. But I would say, looking forward, it's harder to look backwards, because campaigning is going to change so much.
Yeah, definitely.
I don't. It's looking forward. It's whoever gets the most popular votes will be the one that wins.
Okay. Now, tell me, let's just continue with the thought experiment of, assume that that we maintain our current system, right? I see things as getting worse from election to election, to be honest with you, right? Just a lot of concentration of wealth into these states, and sometimes not only the states, but districts within the states, right? Where, they forget, okay, all the rural area, they forget about it, and they focus on where, although Trump last time, I think he probably overperformed in terms of expectations, because they focused on the rural areas quite a bit, right? In any case, if we continue like this and things have been worsening, what would happen in the next 3 election cycles? How would it continue to get worse and worse and worse? If we don't start thinking along the lines that you guys are pushing.
We are going to see the number of voters who are living in battleground states and have the chance for their vote to really matter shrink and shrink and shrink. So fewer and fewer people are going to be the people that actually decide the presidency. So this is just going to lead to a consistently more undemocratic system. And it's not a fluke that this has happened in 2000 and 2016 and almost happened 2 more times this century, which was in 2004. We were 60,000 votes away from having President John Kerry. And of course, in 2020, as we've discussed. And that is because we are in this era of close elections. So if we don't change this, we are very likely going to see another popular vote loser in the White House. And, maybe they're going to get 2 more Supreme Court justices. And it's 7-2 of people that were appointed by the person that the most Americans wanted.
Yeah. Makes sense. So now tell me, I'm sure there are groups out there who are resisting this, saying, no, we should not go that way and so forth. What are their main arguments and how do you counter those arguments?
Yeah. At its core, it is hard to argue against one person, one vote. Every vote should be equal. So our opponents do tend to latch on to kind of every other argument around that. Some of it goes to, what are common things that people think, like we've discussed. They're just going to focus in the big cities and ignore rural America. Or, your state is going to lose power because you're relevant now, and why would you want to give that up, while ignoring the fact that that state probably won't be a battleground state in 4 more years. And also doesn't get to the question of if you think that's right or not, that your vote matters more than other people in other states. So they take a lot of kind of those, there's certainly people that say this wasn't the intent of the founding fathers and we should stick to that, which surface level, the response is we are doing kind of what the founders intended, right? We're not advocating for a constitutional amendment to change what they put together. They made it so that state legislatures, they were the closest body to the people. They were the ones who could decide how electors were awarded from their state. And so we are asking state legislators to consider their constitutional duty. We think there's a better way to do it. Not exactly. I don't think the founders would have envisioned someone like me lobbying for something like this in 2022 or anything about our current society, frankly. But we are still doing it within the frame of the Constitution, of course.
Yeah. The ultimate goal is shared, I think, with the initial sentiment that was driving the Constitution, I'd say, right, is to enable folks to not to have concentrated power. So I think the problem with concentrated power is across the board, whether in the politics or the economy or whatever, is the cause of many ills. And I think I see what you guys do as being one of those movements against concentrated power and all the ills that it causes. So how do you guys go about getting the message out? Last week you were meeting with the legislative, right? Tell me about that process. I just want to understand the kinds of day-to-day, week-to-week, month-to-month challenges you guys face as you push, because I know it's a whole lot of work to move the needle in any way.
Yeah, it is a year-round process because state legislators, they're not going to do this lightly, right? They have never been asked to consider this, or, in probably the history of most states, they have never changed how they award their electors. So we do a lot of education. We do public education with voters and really meeting one-on-one with every single legislator in states that we're trying to work with. And so that's really important for us. And then we get to most state legislatures meet during the first 6 months of odd numbered years. So that is where we are at right now. Some of them meet longer, but the bulk of our work, when we're actually getting enactments happens between January and June of odd numbered years. So right now we are crisscrossing the country, lobbying and flying to states when we have a hearing. We just got a notice this morning that a hearing is scheduled in Alaska on Monday. I had a hearing in Nevada yesterday where we got voted out of committee. So that is a lot of it right now, is taking all the work we did for the previous 18 months and kind of getting it all lined up. So we have a lobbying team, which I do lobbying in a few of our states, but also the part of it that, I love, since I'm the Grassroots director, is more of that mobilizing of the people. So personally, I work with our partners across the country in creating coalitions and getting their members engaged with the campaign, getting them resources to talk about the bill, and having people all across the country, volunteer with our phone banks and help us contact voters in these states. Because as a lobbyist, we can talk to state legislators until we're blue in the face. But if 15 constituents call them and say, hey, this is really important to me, that stands out. These aren't members of Congress. They're not getting hundreds of calls a day. These are your local legislator who you might run into at your coffee shop, and they are accessible and they are interested in knowing what their constituents want.
Wow, very smart. Yeah. And so walk me through the process. So the state legislator, you go and you pitch them, so to speak, right? Have a session with them. Just walk me through the exact how do you get to a point where the state would advance, would put it in front of the legislator and then pass it?
So we work to find a champion in the state that says, I really care about this. I'm going to make this my issue. We work to make sure we have the votes in the chamber. So we want to, and we just have to get a majority vote in all of these states. And so the overall process is we go to a committee, we have a hearing, we have to get voted out of that committee. In about half of the states, we would go to a secondary committee and have to be voted out again. And then the other half, we just go directly to the floor. And so that is at the point where the entire House or the entire Senate would have the opportunity to vote on it. Mm-hmm. At that point, we need a majority of those votes, and then it gets sent over to the other chamber where we repeat that process of going through a committee again. So it's at least a 4-step process before it gets to being signed by the governor. So it's how most of our bills are passed, but certainly from our perspective, it takes a lot of work to get there, and a lot of coordinating and making sure that people really understand why this vote is so important for them.
Yeah. What's the the cycle? How long between initial to success that you've seen on average, if there's an average?
For states overall, some states have taken 12, 15 years, but within a state, a legislative session, we're going to have this done in Nevada and Minnesota by the end of May, just because of when their state legislative sessions end. So if we don't have it done by then, we have to come back in 2 years, and that's our next opportunity.
Yeah. And let's say for which one do you focusing on right now? Nevada, you said?
Yeah, Nevada, Michigan, Minnesota all have bills that are moving right now.
Okay. And when did you start that process with Nevada, for example? That conversation, where it got you to this point?
Before I started working on this issue, honestly. So I would say probably around 2011 would be my best guess.
Okay. So it's it's a process, and it takes several years, right, to get there. Okay.
You've been listening to Humanity 8.0 with your host, Dr. Ahmed Bouzid, founder and CEO of Witlingo. Brought to you by Rokos. Thanks for listening.